We talk endlessly about boomers and millennials. We dissect Gen Z like it is a brand new species. But there is a whole generation sitting in the middle, rarely named, almost invisible. Generation X. They are the older coworkers who rarely complain, the parents who can seem oddly detached, the people who helped build the internet but never felt the need to narrate their breakfast. And that silence is exactly what makes them so misunderstood. It is easy to mistake restraint for emptiness, but psychologically, Gen X is not checked out. They are calibrated. Their habits were shaped by a world that trained them to rely on themselves, protect privacy, and trust competence over promises. Picture an ordinary afternoon in the late 1970s. You are 8 years old, walking home with a key in your pocket and no adult in sight. You let yourself into a quiet house where the air feels still, the light sits in the hallway, and the loudest sound is the refrigerator turning on and off. You make a snack, do homework at the table, and wait, not for entertainment, but for proof that someone will eventually return. There is no text message, no doorbell camera, no quick check-in. Just time and silence. That scene did not simply teach Gen X independence. It taught a deeper lesson about attachment and uncertainty. The world does not guarantee supervision. When you grow up repeating that moment, you learn to self-regulate, to tolerate boredom, and to treat safety as something you create, not something you assume. In that world, rules were not long conversations. They were boundaries with consequences. If you crossed a line, the feedback came fast, and it was rarely softened by a discussion of feelings. From a learning perspective, this creates a high-contingency environment, where actions and outcomes are tightly linked, and the brain updates its predictions quickly. Over time, you start scanning situations for what they will cost you before you act. That is why so many Gen X adults seem to think 2 or 3 steps ahead. It is not about being colder, it is about being trained to anticipate impact in real time. A small choice could become a real problem, so you learn to manage risk early, especially around reputation, conflict, and what other people get to know about you. Then came the bigger lesson. The rules themselves could change without warning. Gen X watched adults preach stability while families fractured and divorce became a normal backdrop. They watched people give years to a company, only to be thanked with a layoff when the numbers shifted. The message was always the same: work hard, follow the plan, and life will reward you. But the reality kept contradicting it. Psychologically, that breeds a form of defensive realism. You still hope, but you do not stake your nervous system on hope. You build backup plans. You keep your expectations flexible. You learn to treat security as temporary, not promised. So, when someone calls Gen X cynical, they are missing the point. It is not bitterness. It is pattern recognition, formed in an era that kept pulling the rug out and calling it normal. That is why their relationship with visibility feels so different. When Gen X messed up as kids, it stayed local. A bad decision lived in a few people's memories, then faded into the background. There were no viral clips, no permanent receipts, no audience of strangers. So the instinct became simple. The less people know, the safer you are. This is not a failure to understand technology. It is an early learned strategy for managing risk. Broadcasting your inner life does not feel empowering to them. It feels like giving away leverage. Privacy was not a brand, it was normal. And once you learn that safety can depend on discretion, you do not abandon that lesson just because the platform makes it easy. Irony became their emotional armor. They grew up with a low-grade sense of threat in the background, the kind adults mentioned in passing, then immediately dismissed. You were taught to take danger seriously, but also to act like it was not worth talking about. That tension trains psychological distance. If you can make a dry joke first, you stay in control of the moment. If you sound unbothered, no one can see where it hurts. So the Gen X tone is often misread as apathy. It is usually self-protection. That psychology shows up most clearly at work. Many Gen Xers got their first taste of adulthood in jobs that would feel almost archaic now. Paper routes before sunrise, bagging groceries, running a fast food register, and doing mental math when the machine failed. These were not passion projects. They were early training in responsibility, speed, and consequences. Then they watched the adult world reveal its other truth. Loyalty to a company was not a guarantee of protection, so they shifted the target of loyalty inward, not to an institution, but to competence. If security can vanish, then skill becomes the only stable asset. That is why they tend to be quietly formidable. They do not advertise effort, they just get good. And here is the paradox. They rarely ask for help because self-reliance feels like dignity. But when someone else needs help, they show up without drama, without credit, and without making it a public story. This also explains their complicated relationship with authority. Gen X does not automatically respect titles. They respect capability. If you know what you are doing and you can prove it in the work, they will follow you with a kind of steady loyalty that does not need applause. But if your power is mostly symbolic, if you talk well and execute poorly, they disengage fast. It is not rebellion for its own sake. It is a learned response to watching adults with influence make decisions that felt careless, inconsistent, or self-serving. So their trust is conditional and practical. Earn it through competence, and it sticks. Expect it because of hierarchy, and it never arrives. So Gen X ends up as a bridge generation, holding two worlds at once. They remember the analog weight of boredom, solitude, and figuring things out with your hands, but they also learn to adapt as the digital world took over. They are not more evolved than anyone else. They are simply shaped by a narrow slice of history when old assumptions were collapsing and new ones had not solidified yet. And bridges are rarely celebrated. You do not stare at a bridge when you are trying to get somewhere. You just trust it to hold. That is the quiet genius of Gen X. Showing up, staying functional, and asking for almost nothing. If you are Gen X, what part of this feels most true, and what did I miss?